Yeah, when I was watching this, I'm thinking, I don't know Gillian Fellows, but I bet you he's a huge fan, and he's modeled some Downton Abbey off of this, because I know Downton Abbey very, very well, and there's a lot of Downton Abbey that I see in Mrs. Miniver.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. My name is James, as ever with my friend Steve, and this is Every Best Picture, where we review every single winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture. This episode is 1942's Mrs. Miniver.
Hey, but if you haven't subscribed, it'd be a great favor to us if you did. And just as a reminder, here at Deep Dive, we do spoilers, so you have been warned. James, let's talk Mrs. Miniver.
Okay, I'm going to put my hands up straight away and say I had never seen Mrs. Miniver before watching it for this show. And I thought I knew vaguely what it was about, and I was totally wrong. For some reason, I think I got it confused in my head with Mildred Pierce.
Okay.
And I didn't even know. I mean, it's technically, it's not a British movie, it's a Hollywood movie, but it's about, but I didn't know that it was British. I didn't know that it was a World War II movie. For shame. And for some reason, I thought Joan Crawford was in it. So I really did think it was Mildred Pierce in my head.
Yeah.
But I don't know why, but those two had always been just connected in my head and mixed up in my head. And I'd never got around to watching this. And now I have, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, it's a wonderful film. It's one of my parents' favorites when I was a kid. They were always talking about Mrs. Miniver. So I did watch it many years ago. Rewatching it again was really like watching it for the first time. And I was pleasantly surprised. I'm going to go out on a limb here because I know Casablanca is coming up on our list, and that is my favorite movie of all time. But I want to go and say, I think up until 1942, from 1929, I think this may be my favorite film that we've reviewed so far in our Every Best Picture list. I thought this movie is absolutely brilliant.
It's a beautiful story. It really is. I mean, just to sort of set it up for those who don't know, it's just that life in a small English town in the run up and the outbreak of World War II, essentially. And Mrs. Miniver, played by Greer Garson, they're kind of a middle class family who have a little bit of money to burn, but they realize that very quickly that they're kind of hiding their materialism from each other at the beginning. She's bought a new hat, he's bought a new car, and they don't really want to tell each other. And very quickly, all of that pales in significance when the war comes up. And you realize that although they're sat very comfortably within this class system, where there are the sort of the village folk, and then there are the aristocrats in the hall, in the stately home at the top. All of that kind of has to be thrown out the window. And this is propaganda. Let's get that out of the way. This is 100% a British, pro-Allied propaganda movie in 1942. Made, I was reading up on it. It was being developed before the Americans got into the war, just before they started filming. The Pearl Harbor was bombed. They were rewriting it on set to make the German character nastier. The German pilot who is vile. I mean, he's handsome and all the rest of it, but he sort of in no uncertain terms says, I'm going to bomb all of you and more will follow me and they will bomb all of you. And she's like, what about the white women and children? You're all to blame. And he was like, how more clear cut a villain could you have, which, only underscores, how benevolent and how,
altruistic. The British
and virtuous the British are, which culminates in this stirring sermon by the priest, which is essentially a call to arms for the British people. It's like, this is a people's war. This is not just about soldiers fighting in trenches somewhere over there. We're all in this together. And you got the planes flying over and Land of Hope and Glory. You're like, blimey, okay, all right.
James, that famous poster we always associate with the Brits, keep calm and carry on. This was personified in this film. I mean, nothing sways the British people. Bombs, the destruction of their house, the destruction of their church, friends and family dying. We carry on because we are British, and we will get to the other side of this with a stiff upper lip. Despite, yes, it is propaganda. But what I really like, too, is it shows humanity at its best. It's sad to think that humanity acting well with one another and putting each other first. And it's a wonderful moment towards the end when Lady Belden, she's always won the rose contest. And of course, Mrs. Miniver gives her that look that causes her better self to come forward. And when she allows basically the station keeper, who is just the simple man in the village, who's just raised this beautiful flower that he names Mrs. Miniver, when she basically represses herself and her own ego and her own narcissism, and she puts somebody else before them, at that moment I was getting misty-eyed. I was just thought, this is humanity at its best. Yes, it's propaganda, but it's also something we should strive for. And I think that's why, as the decades pass, people rediscover this film and think this is good, because it fills the soul.
You know what was going through my head at that moment? When she already knows that she's won, and when she reads out that the winner, that he is the winner, you know what's going through my head? Attaboy, Clarence.
Yes,
because it's Henry Travers. It's Henry Travers. It's Clarence.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just kind of like, attaboy, Clarence. And it is, you know, and it's this great moment when she tosses the class system out the window, essentially. You know, her aristocracy. You know, there have been some scenes earlier where she's sort of stubbornly refusing to go down into the cellar or to abide by the blackout rules or whatever, because she's like, oh, well, don't be so ridiculous, this can't apply to me. And they have to kind of sort of drag her down to the cellar. And it's like, no, this is very serious. This is going to affect all of us equally. You've just got to kind of shut up and get on with it. And it was this great sort of leveler. It's this wonderful moment. It's not subtle, but it's very effective. And it works really well.
And Lady Belden, I'd be willing to bet that Julian Fellows, the writer and creator of Downton Abbey, is a huge Mrs. Miniver fan, because Lady Belden, you know that the Dowager Grantham, played by Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey, is just modeled after Lady Belden, who has these just witticisms, who can be aristocratic, can be selfish, but when push comes to shove, can just push down that you know, demon inside or whatever. That's probably the wrong phrase, but and just let the angel out. And I when I was watching this, I'm thinking, oh, I don't know Julian Fellows, but I bet you he's a huge fan, and he's modeled some Downton Abbey off of this, because I know Downton Abbey very, very well, and there's a lot of Downton Abbey that I see in Mrs. Miniver.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's some wonderful sort of upstairs, downstairs moments. I like their Mrs. Miniver and her husband's relationship with Gladys, their sort of housemaid, you know, particularly when she starts a relationship with Horace, is it, down at the post office, who then he's going off to war. And so he comes in to say goodbye, and they give him some brandy, and he offers it to Gladys, and Gladys knocks the whole thing back. And they're like, okay, well, you better have another one. And then, just little moments like that where they could have been very sort of condescending, or sort of illustrated the wide gap between the classes, but they don't. You know, it was really sort of nicely handled in order to bring everybody together. And little moments like that work just as well as the big spectacular set pieces, like all the little boats going to Dunkirk, or where where the fighter jet crashes in their backyard and it sort of explodes in front of them. You know, it had it all in that regard.
You know, one of the things that I found disappointing, my wife and I were discussing it too, is at the beginning when Henry Travers, who grows the rose, says to Mrs. Miniver, you know, I need to show you something. Can you come over here? And there's kind of in the 21st century, an old man creepiness to it. There's been so many jokes made. He says things that are in total innocence in the movie. And I remember saying to Tammy, it's horrible. It's a horrible testament to us and where we're at in society, that we view things that are really innocent through this lens. I wish I couldn't view certain things that he said through a lens of modern sensibilities, because it tended to lessen the beauty of what I was watching, because it was total innocence. It was total respect. And I just an acknowledgement.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we've been completely corrupted by so much cynicism and satire that it's impossible for us to watch anything wholesome and earnest and not see not try and twist it into something slightly more creepy. But it's nice. It's nice to be able to just for a moment sort of escape into that and be like, no, this is all above board. You know, at a time, to give it its due, where films were being forced to be actually quite suggestive, when they were trying to imply something salacious or something creepy, you know, because of the Hays Code and whatever, they weren't allowed to show it on
Yeah.
screen, and they had to actually sort of nod and wink slightly. But no, here I think it's all pretty
Yeah.
above board.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with William Wyler being an American Jew who grew up in Germany initially, and really he was not happy with America's isolationist policy. When this movie went into production, we were not at war. In fact, the Hayes Act prohibited anti-Nazi propaganda.
Right.
You couldn't be anti-Nazi and get a movie released. So they were already towing a line there. Obviously, Pearl Harbor happened during production of the movie, and number of scenes were rewritten, which really added to me watching this, thinking we're watching it from a friendly distance of 75 plus years away from World War II. This was occurring when they didn't know which way this war was going to go. So
Absolutely.
when the Nazi soldier says, we're going to come and bomb your cities, 30,000 died in Rotterdam, and that's what we're going to do to England. That, William Wyler is trying to rouse the American spirit and saying, you guys have got to start getting on the side of right and wrong here. You can't you can't stay in the neutral corner. There's a right and wrong, and you need to choose it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you could. I mean, this was kind of sort of came out at the lowest point of the war, as far as the British were concerned. The evacuation from Dunkirk. I mean, as a lot more people are familiar with now, thanks to the Christopher Nolan movie, was a real kind of low point. They managed to spin it into something sort of positive. The Dunkirk spirit became a kind of rallying cry almost. Where they did put this call out to like everybody in the south of England: if you've got a small boat, the little boats as they're referred to, go to Ramsgate, very close to actually where my parents have retired to, and so I go down there. So when I go back to the UK these days, and head out and just take your own little boats across, because we've got like 400,000 soldiers or whatever it is on the beaches that need to get home, and there's no way of getting them home. They are literally pulling out of mainland Europe. That is not a sign of success. That is really us on the back foot. So retreat back to the island essentially. And it wasn't until the Battle of Britain that we were fending them off until the very end. But it was the Battle of Britain that followed on, and that was like what really helped us. But anyway, this is not a history lesson.
But it could be, because it's fascinating. It's interesting history, and I think that's what another aspect of the film that was very interesting is they celebrated the mundane in and amidst all of this world-changing events that was happening around them. How this little suburban London village is going to maintain its steadfastness, both in its faith. I mean, it really had a rousing faith involved. In fact, the sermon given by the minister in the blasted out church at the end of the film would be repeated in propaganda newsreels for years to come. In fact, President Roosevelt had it printed on like thousands and thousands of flyers and sent it out, because it was just so inspiring to try to rouse the Americans into the war effort.
But it's like what you said, it's keep calm and carry on. It is, we are only going to get through this by not spending all our time in the cellar, fearing for our lives. We've got to, just keep going on with our day-to-day lives. And that's why this movie and the novel that came before it, of course, is called Mrs. Miniver. This isn't about Dunkirk, and it isn't about, the blackouts and whatever. It's about the woman who kept her household together, kept the family together through thick and thin by just staying the course, essentially, and being a sort of a beacon of domestic normality throughout all of this craziness. And that's the beauty of the performance and of the film.
Yeah, it's almost like little vignettes, because it's not really a single story. It's just this woman's life and the orbits of her husband, her kids, her community around, and the nation at large, and how they're affected. But it's just day to day and the things that happen. And I think that's something that people found extremely relatable in 1942 as they do in 2023.
For sure. I mean, we haven't mentioned Vin, Richard Ney's character yet, who is, the oldest of their three children by some distance. He's like a good sort of 15 years the oldest, who comes back from Oxford, a sort of a renewed, shall we say, socialist or whatever. He's definitely sort of, very much been made aware of his privilege and doesn't like it and wants to readdress the balance and believes, and then obviously signs up and becomes a a pilot in the RAF and all the rest of it. One thing was really interesting is watching the film, and I had a couple of thoughts. I was like, Greer Garson looks very young to have all of these children, particularly to be Richard Ney's mother. And I didn't look any of this up until afterwards. And then there were a couple of moments where he's saying goodbye to his lovely young fiancée wife, Teresa Wright's character, and also to his mum. And I was like, these smackers that he's giving Greer Garson seem far more sensual than the kisses he's giving to his supposed fiancée. So I look up later, and Greer Garson, was like 38 at the time. She was 11 years older than the actor, something like that. And as soon as the movie finishes, they hook up and get married. The mother and son, rather than him having an affair with like Teresa Wright or whatever. And I was like, I knew it. I knew there was something. There was something not right, or very right, depending on how you look at it, about their interactions. There was some real passion there.
Yeah, he was playing over age. In real life, he was 26, she was 38. So it's not horrible, but you're right. In fact, I forgot the name of the actress that was originally offered the Greer Garson role, but she turned it down initially because she didn't want to be, at her age, the mother of a grown son. And Greer Garson similarly wasn't going to do it. She had to be talked into it by William Wyler.
Wow. Well, and it won her the Oscar. So very much glad she did.
Interesting. Walter Pidgeon, same. He was going to turn this role down, and he was told by a friend, "Oh, you'll want to work with William Wyler. It'd be one of the best acting experiences you ever have." And he subsequently went on to say, "I always thank my friend for that, because although he didn't win the Oscar for Best Actor, he was nominated."
He was, and that's 2 Best Picture winners in a row, because he was in How Green Was Our Valley as well. So So well done, Walter. You got your agents doing you some good, giving you some good advice. Okay, so yes, talking Oscars, this was the 15th Academy Awards, and new records are being broken all the time. And Mrs. Miniver was nominated, I think, for 11 Oscars. It won 6. It won 6. It won Best Picture, Best Director, the first of William Wyler's 3 Best Director Oscars.
3. Only to be outdone by John Ford.
Yes, he won 4. Greer Garson was in the midst of a run equaled only by Bette Davis, where she got nominated for Best Actress 5 years in a row. And this, I think, was the second year of that run, and she won. Teresa Wright also won Best Supporting Actress, where she was up against Dame May Whitty, who was playing Lady Belden. So she was up against her own grandmother within the movie. This was not the first movie to get nominations in all 4 acting categories, but it was the first. But it did get nominated in all 4 acting categories, and then it got a 5th in Best Supporting Actress as well. So it was the first film to be nominated to get 5 Best Acting nominations. I don't think it's the only one, but it was the first one to achieve that. It's probably best known in terms of an Oscars, because Greer Garson apparently still holds the record for the longest ever acceptance speech. Apparently nearly 6 minutes, and it was because of her that they started putting that 45-second cap on it, which is now the bane of everyone's existence.
What I've heard is the urban legend is it lasted anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, but nobody can tell for certain because no original recordings are left, save some newsreel footage. So nobody has actual evidence of how exactly long that speech was. So they don't know if it's been rumored to be as long as half an hour, which is probably a stretch.
I mean, that's kind of pretty crazy. But then at the same time, you're like, well, when people win, they like to kind of just ramble and ramble and ramble. It's like, okay, I could certainly believe it. I mean, Teresa Wright, who won Best Supporting Actress, she was also nominated for Best Actress for another movie. So she was kind of competing with Greer Garson at the same time. What
was it going up against for Best Picture?
Pride of the Yankees was the film.
Pride of the Yankees,
which was the other film Teresa Wright was in. She got a Best Actress nomination.
Oh, did she play Lou Gehrig's wife in that one?
She must have done. Yeah.
Okay.
Another bit of propaganda, 49th Parallel by Powell and Pressburger. Kings Row. See, this is one of the years. This is the year when they expanded to 10 nominees in Best Picture. So you had Wake Island, Yankee Doodle Dandy, which obviously James Cagney won Best Actor for. Talk of the Town.
Beat
Yeah,
Walter
Pride of the
Pidgeon.
Yankees, Magnificent Ambersons, Orson
Well,
Welles.
yeah, yep.
Pied Piper, Random Harvest, King's Row, 49th Parallel, Mrs. Miniver. This was, yeah, so they did start to fluctuate how many nominees there were. Apparently 4 different films. I was trying to count quickly how many films were nominated. 4 films won Best Documentary. It was a 4-way tie. And I think maybe it's because it was during the war or something, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 films were nominated for Best Documentary. And 4 won. A 4-way tie. It was actually pretty ridiculous. I'm not sure what's going on there.
That's interesting.
And almost all of them, it will be no surprise to know, almost all of them are like war related.
It was that time.
It was that time.
Can imagine. Well, James, as always, as we do in this series, we ask the question of, does this film stand the test of time? Does Mrs. Miniver stand the test of time? Does it deserve its place in Oscar history? What say you?
I would think absolutely on both counts. As I said, I hadn't seen it before, and it completely swept me away, entertained. I mean, I know we like to sort of pick holes in films that come out now from other countries sometimes that are that are jingoistic propaganda, and this shamelessly is, but it's at a time when the country was at war and it needed. I mean, it ends with an appeal for war bonds. Just at the end, which a lot of films did at that time because they needed the money. And I think we're so far removed from that we can look back on that with a certain degree of some quaint nostalgia and go, oh yes, simpler times. If they tried to do something like that now, I don't think people would respond to it very favorably at all.
No, you couldn't have a movie ending with the congregation and the church all singing "Onward, Christian Soldiers" together.
I know. I mean, and it was, but the way it's framed but it's beautiful. It is a rousing finale, and it does sort of instill in you the values that it wants you to, and you do feel, yes, we onwards and upwards, we will endure, and we will overcome, and all of those kind of things. You do feel. I mean, I thought Greer Garson is just radiant in this movie. She's absolutely spectacular, compelling, and gorgeous, and all the rest of it. And I thought, by and large, everybody was pretty good. I really liked the little son, who just has this great knack for just saying what's on everybody's mind in any given moment. He's like, are you going to marry her? And then when they're being bombed, he's like, are they trying to kill us, mummy? It's like, I think he was great. Little kid actors like that are often quite irritating, but he was quite,
he did really well.
He was great.
Yeah, I agree too. Just echoing what you said with Dame May Whitty, who played Lady Belden. I love when she says to Greer Garson's Mrs. Miniver, "You're going to give me that look, aren't you? The one that makes me change what's in my heart," or something. She says something like that. And you're right. Greer Garson has this way. It's almost Christ-like in a way, in that wherever she goes, here I am bringing the faith element in there, but there is a Christ-likeness to Greer Garson's character in this, that wherever she goes, people become better people because of their relationship with her. And I think that is kind of, in the Christian faith, that's what's supposed to happen. But you can see that that's an element that is being portrayed. I mean, not overt Christianity in that sense, but just the idea of, by certain choices that we have, we can alter people's behavior around us for good or for ill, and she chooses to do it for good, and the impact that has both on her family and on the community. I just love this film. I agree, it not only deserves its place in Oscar history, but up until 1942, I think it's possibly my favorite film thus far.
Wow. Yeah, well, I'm absolutely delighted. I finally, I don't know why it took me like 46 years to get around to watching it, but I have now watched it, and I love it, and I will definitely come back to it. I love a good World War II movie, and I love, this kind of film, and it's absolutely, it's right up there, and I can't wait to watch it again.
Next time I watch this film, I want to do it in an outdoor cinema. I remember watching, we're going to do Casablanca next.
A bombed out church.
And that's nice. This would be great on a cool, crisp night, sitting outside on a big screen with a few friends and a big bucket of popcorn.
Definitely.
That would be
definitely a nice garden party.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's what James and I think about Mrs. Miniver. But what do you think? Do you think the propaganda elements were a little bit too much? Or do you kind of echo how we feel, that it just gives you that good old nostalgia feel? And it's just a great cast all around with a great story. Let us know in the comment section below. James?
Yeah, do you feel that it deserved to win Best Picture in 1942? You know, you can see why people responded to it the way that they did at the time that they did. But, you know, is it better than The Pride of the Yankees or Yankee Doodle Dandy, The 49th Parallel? Let us know in the comments, where do you stand on those films of 1942?
I love Pride of the Yankees, but Mrs.
I don't think I've
Miniver's
ever seen it.
Yeah, it's a better film. It's Gary Cooper, Lou Gehrig, man. Absolutely. Anyhow, until next episode. Bye-bye.
You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be. Your voice